So, if you look at the American political system today, you are you're faced with this massive glaring paradox.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. Everyone inside the machine thinks the sky is falling, essentially, like all the time.
Yeah, totally.
But the machine itself, it just keeps churning along. Why does it feel like we are constantly, 24/7 on the absolute brink of total collapse?
Like we're barely surviving crisis after unprecedented crisis.
Exactly. And yet, the basic functions of the government somehow continue. I mean, the mail still gets delivered, right?
It is the ultimate diagnostic puzzle, really. I mean, we are basically trying to evaluate a patient that is simultaneously running a marathon and experiencing acute organ failure.
Wow, that's a vivid image.
Right. But the traditional tools we use to understand political health, they just don't seem to apply anymore. They're obsolete for this.
Which is exactly why you and I are here today. So welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are really thrilled you're joining us for this one because we are looking straight under the hood of American political power today.
We have an incredibly dense, genuinely fascinating stack of source material to get through.
We really do. We're looking at this collection of diagnostic white papers and, extensive notes by political analyst Jamie Thornberry.
Specifically, we'll be breaking down two major pieces. One is titled From Factions to Foundations, and the other is The Architecture of Managed Democracy.
Right. And our mission for you today is basically to decode why the constitutional guardrails we always relied on seem to be just snapping under pressure.
And how the digital age is acting like a massive systemic accelerant to all of this.
Yes. And ultimately, what it actually means to live in what Thornberry categorizes as a managed democracy.
What's fascinating here is that Thornberry's core argument pushes back against the common narrative.
Oh, totally. How so? Exactly.
Well, the assertion isn't that the American system is technically broken, right? Not in the sense of, like, a car engine that has thrown a rod and completely seized up.
Right. It hasn't stopped completely.
Exactly. Rather, the system is operating under conditions and these immense, sustained pressures that its original architects simply never anticipated.
And more importantly, they never designed it to withstand those pressures.
Exactly.
So the engine is running, but it has basically been redlining for a decade.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. It's operating in what engineers would call a supercritical state.
A supercritical state. Wow.
Yeah. And I think it's vital to set the stage for you right here at the top. The analysis we're unpacking today is not about taking partisan sides.
Right. Absolutely not. We have to be clear about that.
We are not interested in adjudicating right versus left or, declaring who is morally correct in today's political battles.
Yeah.
That's not what the source material does.
No, not at all. This is a structural, almost physician-like diagnosis of the system itself. We're essentially examining the bones, the ligaments, and the nervous system of American governance.
Just to understand the physical strain it's currently enduring.
Okay, let's test that theory by starting with the original blueprint, right? Because to understand the strain on the structure, we really have to understand how the structure was supposed to bear weight in the first place.
Right, and Thornberry calls this the Madisonian of physics problem.
Okay, let's unpack this. The Madisonian physics problem.
To really grasp that, we need to put ourselves in the mindset of James Madison during the summer of 1787.
Right. Hot summer in Philadelphia.
Very hot.
Yeah.
And the framers were absolutely not optimists. That is a crucial baseline here.
They were pretty cynical about human nature, weren't they?
Extremely cynical. I mean, they had just fought a grueling revolution. They had watched their first attempt at a government structure. The Articles of Confederation failed completely because it was too weak.
Right, it just fell apart.
Exactly. And they had read enough classical history to know that republics usually die.
They tend to collapse either into, authoritarian tyranny or just volatile mob rule.
Yep. So their primary goal in Philadelphia was not to build a highly efficient, fast-moving government. Their goal was to build a resistant one.
Because they were terrified of what Madison called factions, which today we'd probably just call them political parties. Right?
Yeah, political parties are highly organized special interest groups. The fear of factions is really the defining anxiety of the Constitution.
Right, like in the Federalist Papers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In Federalist Number 10 and Federalist Number 51, Madison articulated this deep dread that factions would prioritize their own narrow, self-serving interests over the broader common good.
Which they always do.
Right. But he also recognized a fundamental dilemma. You cannot outlaw factions without outlawing liberty itself.
Because the urge to form groups and advocate for your interests is just human nature. You can't ban human nature.
Exactly. So, since he couldn't eliminate the cause of factions, his brilliant solution was to try and control their effects.
And how do you do that?
You multiply them.
You create so many of them that they constantly just get in each other's way.
Yes. You design a vast, diverse republic so that no single faction can ever maintain a permanent, crushing majority. Madison essentially designed the Constitution as a literal physics problem meant to generate constant friction.
Right, that famous phrasing, ambition must be made to counteract ambition.
That's the one. And the entire system relied on 4 specific mechanisms of constitutional friction to keep power diluted.
Okay, let's walk through those 4 mechanisms, because this is really the baseline for everything that goes wrong later on in the text.
Right, so first is factional multiplicity.
Meaning lots of different groups.
Exactly. By having a large country with diverse economic interests, farmers, merchants, coastal elites, frontier settlers, you ensure that power is naturally scattered.
Okay, makes sense. What's the second?
Second is institutional independence. The branches of government, executive, legislative, judicial were designed to jealously guard their own power from the others.
So they're always fighting for turf.
Right. The pride of the institution was supposed to outweigh any temporary alliance.
Okay, got it. Mechanism 3.
Third is deliberative delay. The system was built to be intentionally slow.
Intentionally slow. I think people forget that.
They do. Bicameralism, vetoes, staggered elections, these are all meant to force a pause so public passions could cool down before becoming law.
And the fourth mechanism?
Local representation. Politicians were tethered to the highly specific, unique needs of their geographic communities, not a national platform.
I read this breakdown in the white paper, and I immediately thought about it like a car engine.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, the founders essentially built an engine that is intentionally designed with heavy internal friction.
Right.
Like, the goal isn't to win a race. The friction is there to prevent the car from ever going dangerously fast.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
They didn't build it that way because they were bad engineers who didn't know how to make a fast car. They added the friction specifically so you don't accidentally drive the country off a cliff in a fit of sudden passion.
The resistance is the safety mechanism. That analogy captures the Madisonian ideal perfectly.
Thanks. But things have obviously changed.
Radically. And here is the critical pivot in Thornberry's source material. That original assumption relied on fluidity.
Meaning the factions wouldn't stay the same forever.
Exactly. The founders assumed alliances would shift issue by issue. Like on a trade bill, a senator from New York might ally with a senator from Virginia.
Right.
But then on a defense bill, that alliance would shatter and new ones would form. Power was supposed to remain scattered.
But that beautiful fluid physics problem has completely violently collided with the modern reality of political parties.
It really has.
Which is wild, right? Because the Constitution says absolutely nothing about political parties. They literally do not exist in the document.
Not a single mention. George Washington actually warned against them in his farewell address.
He sure did.
And yet what we have today are 2 dominant, permanent, vertically and horizontally integrated structures that have essentially hacked Madison's physics problem.
Okay, let's unpack how they hacked it. When the text says vertically and horizontally integrated, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, vertical integration means a party coordinates a unified strategy from the local city council up to the state legislature, all the way to the federal Congress.
So it's top to bottom?
Right. And horizontal integration means they coordinate across the branches of government. A modern political party aligns the goals of their members in the House, the Senate, and the White House.
Wow.
They figured out how to pour massive amounts of synthetic lubricant into that friction-based engine.
So they bypass the safety mechanisms completely? They remove the friction?
Exactly. Think about that second Madisonian mechanism we discussed, institutional independence.
Right, where Congress and the president fight for turf.
The founders assumed a senator would aggressively check the power of the president, even a president they personally liked.
Because the senator wanted to protect the pride and the power of the Senate itself.
Right. Ambition counteracting ambition. But what happens when the senator and the president belong to the same heavily integrated party machine?
The institutional pride just evaporates.
It collapses entirely into internal coordination. Alignment reinforces alignment.
So the senator doesn't check the president anymore.
No, the senator actively protects the president because their shared national party brand is infinitely more important to that senator's political survival than their institutional pride as a member of the legislative branch.
That is wow.
The parties have successfully reconnected the very power of the Constitution, deliberately, painstakingly divided.
But wait, if these massive synchronized party machines aren't actually outlined in the Constitution, and they are essentially overpowering the intended design, they must be operating outside of the formal legal structure, right? How do they wield so much control if they aren't technically part of the government's blueprint?
That realization leads directly into a concept Thornberry calls the invisible architecture.
The invisible architecture. That sounds ominous.
It does. Political parties function legally as private associations. They are protected by the First Amendment right to freely associate.
Right, like any club.
Right. But over time, they have constructed this parallel governing system that operates in the shadows of the formal Constitution. They manage the outcomes before the constitutional machinery even gets turned on.
Before a single citizen even walks into a voting booth to cast a ballot.
Exactly. Thornberry identifies 3 pre-constitutional filters that these party machines use to bypass structural guardrails long before Election Day.
Okay, let's go through these. What's the first filter?
The first filter is candidate gatekeeping. When you look at a ballot in November, you might feel like you are exercising ultimate democratic power.
You feel like you have a choice.
Right. But you are not looking at a blank slate of all possible ideas in your community. You are looking at 2 options that have already been ruthlessly curated.
I want to make this concrete for the listener. Imagine you live in a mid-sized town, and there's a popular local business owner who understands the community's exact needs.
Okay.
They decide to run for Congress. In a pure Madisonian system, they just run, right? People vote for them.
In theory, yes. But under the invisible architecture, that local leader immediately hits the gatekeepers.
Who are they?
The donor ecosystems, the legacy party networks, the influential insiders. If that local leader holds even one nuanced view that contradicts the national party's rigid orthodoxy, the gatekeepers starve them of support.
They just cut them off.
Yeah. The candidates you finally see on the ballot have been pre-vetted to ensure they will not disrupt the integrated machine.
So the voters are permitted to choose, but they're absolutely not permitted to choose the choosers.
That's a great way to summarize it. And the second filter reinforces the first, the fundraising machine.
Ah, money. Always comes down to money.
Always. Modern governance, especially running for federal office, requires a staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of capital.
Millions and millions of dollars.
Right. Parties, functioning through centralized PACs, super PACs, and national donor networks, control the financial oxygen of American politics.
And this changes the entire incentive structure for an elected official. I mean, think about it. If you're a representative, your financial survival depends on keeping the national party happy.
Completely.
Let's say there's a bill that would deeply benefit your specific local district, but it requires compromising with the other side, and the national party leadership opposes it.
A classic scenario.
If you dissent, if you show independence, the party doesn't just ask nicely for you to fall in line, do they?
No, they cut off your financial oxygen. They might even fund a primary challenger against you to make a public example of you. They actively punish independence.
Which completely neutralizes that fourth Madisonian mechanism we discussed, local representation.
Yes, exactly. The representative is no longer incentivized to serve the unique, localized needs of their geographic district.
Their primary directive is just to serve the demands of the national donor network.
Right. If local needs conflict with national party brand, the local needs lose every single time.
It's depressing. And then there's the third filter to make sure nobody steps out of line publicly.
Messaging control. Parties today operate in total alignment with highly segmented media ecosystems. It is a continuous, 24/7 persuasion environment.
Right.
If a politician deviates from the national brand, they aren't just punished financially. They are punished in the press instantly. They are branded a traitor by their own side's media apparatus.
So what does this all mean? Bringing this all together, party discipline has completely replaced individual deliberation.
It really has.
The constitutional incentive to be an independent actor, representing your actual neighbors and using your own judgment, it's just overridden by the basic biological need for political survival.
And in today's system, survival equals party loyalty.
That is the crux of the crisis, isn't it?
It is, because party loyalty now supersedes institutional loyalty. It places immense, unbearable pressure on the system's remaining formal guardrails.
The ones that are actually in the Constitution.
Right. Remember, the Constitution was built for fluid, shifting factions. It was never built to handle two synchronized, unified blocks of power marching in absolute lockstep against each other.
It just can't handle the weight.
No. And this brings us to one of the most revealing parts of Thornberry's analysis: the systematic breakdown of the rules.
Yes, the diagnostic framework maps this out as the fragility hierarchy. I found this section to be incredibly eye-opening.
It really organizes the chaos, doesn't it?
It does. Thornberry essentially ranks the constitutional guardrails from the most fragile to the most durable, showing us exactly how and why they snap under this new synchronized pressure.
It really explains why the news constantly feels so chaotic.
So walk us through this hierarchy. Let's start at the very bottom, the most delicate layer.
The foundation of the hierarchy, Tier 1, is political norms.
Just the unwritten rules.
Exactly. Norms are the behavioral constraints that rely entirely on tradition and mutual respect. They are incredibly fragile because they aren't enforced by judges or police.
They rely on voluntary restraint.
Right.
So what does a snapped norm actually look like on the ground?
It manifests as the routine weaponization of what Thornberry calls maximal tools.
Maximal tools, like what?
Things that used to be unthinkable or strictly reserved for once-in-a-generation existential crises suddenly become standard operating procedure.
Like threatening to default on the national debt.
Exactly. Or shutting down the government over routine budget disagreements, placing blanket holds on hundreds of military promotions.
These are maximal tools.
Yes. When norms fail, every procedural loophole is exploited for maximum partisan leverage.
You know, I was reading this and it instantly reminded me of a scenario with bad roommates who decide to weaponize a lease agreement.
Well, that's a good analogy.
Right. Because normally, roommates just operate on norms. You clean up after yourself, you don't play loud music at 3 in the morning, you buy the toilet paper if you finish it.
Basic respect.
But once the trust breaks down and the animosity spikes, one roommate gets petty. They decide to strictly enforce a technicality in the lease to punish the other.
Right.
They say, Section 4, paragraph B says no guests after 10 p.m., so your brother has to leave immediately.
And then the other roommate retaliates with their own technicality about, like, refrigerator space.
Exactly. Pretty soon, the apartment is a toxic, unlivable nightmare, even though everyone is technically following the rules. The norms snapped, and the legal structure couldn't handle the hostility.
That is a phenomenal analogy for escalation normalization.
Mm-hmm.
They did it first, so we are completely justified in doing it back.
Ratchet mechanism.
And it only turns one way, tighter.
Mm-hmm.
But the most dangerous snap at this Tier 1 level is what the white people call the loss of losers' consent.
The refusal to accept an election outcome unless your side happens to win.
Exactly. The entire democratic experiment relies on the losing side agreeing to peacefully hand over power, with the understanding that they will have a fair chance to win it back next time.
Right.
When norms erode to the point where the losing side routinely claims the contest was rigged, the foundation of legitimacy crumbles entirely.
And when those informal norms fail, the pressure moves up the ladder, right? To Tier 2, congressional primacy.
Yes. Article 1 of the Constitution unequivocally gives the power to make laws to Congress. That is supposed to be the beating heart of American governance.
But making laws requires debate, concession, and compromise.
And as we just established with the pre-constitutional filters, modern party machines actively punish compromise.
Because if a senator reaches across the aisle, they get a primary challenger funded by the national network.
Exactly. So Congress responds to this incentive structure by abdicating its own power.
They just give up.
Essentially, yes. The snap at Tier 2 looks like the death of the specific debated law. Instead, Congress passes massive, unreadable omnibus packages at midnight to avoid individual recorded votes on controversial issues.
Or they pass vague shell bills. Let's clarify what a shell bill is for the listener, because it's a huge part of this dysfunction.
Okay, imagine Congress passing a bill titled the Clean Air and Water Act. The public loves it.
Sounds great.
But the bill is only 10 pages long, and it essentially just says, the government shall ensure the air and water are clean.
It contains no specific mechanics.
None. No actual emission limits, no real policy. Congress takes the political credit for passing a popular concept, but they outsource the actual, difficult, controversial writing of the law to unelected regulators in the executive branch.
They dodge the hard choices just to survive their primaries.
Which naturally bleeds right into Tier 3, checks and balances.
Right. The snap here is that congressional oversight over the executive branch becomes entirely conditional based on party alignment.
Yes. Madison envisioned Congress constantly interrogating the president's actions.
Holding their feet to the fire.
Right. Today, oversight only happens in divided government. If one party controls both the White House and Congress, they create intentional structural blind spots.
They just look the other way.
They simply refuse to investigate the failures or overreaches of their own party leader, because damaging the president damages the shared party brand. The check is neutralized.
Now, I found Tier 4 to be the most personally compelling because it deals with human psychology, really. The oath of office.
Oh, this one is rough.
Every elected official swears an oath to support and defend the Constitution. But all of their earthly incentives, the donor money, the media coverage, the primary voters demand absolute loyalty to the party.
So the snap at Tier 4 is a public loyalty reordering.
Loyalty reordering, meaning what?
We begin to see politicians blatantly prioritizing their caucus alignment over their independent judgment of what is constitutional or ethical. They will tie themselves into rhetorical knots to defend an action by their party's president that they would have vehemently, righteously condemned if a president of the opposing party had done the exact same thing.
It is a pure survival calculation. The oath becomes secondary to the brand.
Exactly. Which moves us to Tier 5, electoral feedback. Elections are fundamentally supposed to be corrective mechanisms.
Right. If the public is unhappy with the direction of the country, they vote for change, the politicians get the message, and policy adjusts.
But when candidates are heavily pre-filtered by gatekeepers and legislative districts are gerrymandered to be overwhelmingly safe for one party or the other, elections stop being about persuasion.
They stop being about convincing the middle.
Right. They devolve into mere mobilization contests.
It's just about who can scare their most extreme base into turning out in higher numbers.
Yes. The feedback loop between the general public's desires and the government's actions is effectively severed.
And finally, we reach Tier 6, the most durable structure and the last to snap, judicial legitimacy.
The courts are structurally insulated by design lifetime appointments, no elections.
But their authority is ultimately fragile, isn't it?
It is, because it relies on the public and the other branches actually agreeing to follow their rulings. The courts have no army to enforce their decisions.
The snap here is chilling.
It really is. It looks like the authority of the court becoming conditional. Citizens and political leaders begin to state openly that they will only accept court rulings they politically agree with.
Right. We see politicians openly discussing ignoring the court or structurally packing it to guarantee a specific ideological outcome.
When judicial legitimacy snaps, the final referee is basically removed from the field.
Okay, I want to pause here and play devil's advocate for a second, or at least point out the logical gap in all of this.
Go for it.
We've just walked through this devastating hierarchy where norms are gone, Congress is terrified to pass specific laws, oversight is a partisan weapon, and elections are just base mobilization exercises. If Congress is completely paralyzed by these primary threats, and they aren't functioning the way Madison intended, how is the government still running?
It's a great question.
I mean, the country didn't just starve. The economy is massive, regulations are happening, infrastructure is built. How does anything actually get done?
That is the essential question. And the answer lies in what Thornberry categorizes as governance by workaround.
Governance by workaround.
This represents the death of visible law.
The migration of power?
Precisely. When legislative deliberation on the open floor of Congress becomes too politically hazardous, the actual process of lawmaking doesn't cease.
Right. The country's too complex. It requires management.
So the lawmaking simply migrates to the shadows. It moves away from the elected representatives and shifts into executive orders, permanent emergency declarations, and most significantly, the opaque corridors of executive agencies.
We are talking about the administrative state.
Yes. You have tens of thousands of unelected administrators operating safely insulated from electoral correction or public scrutiny, writing the actual substance of American law.
Remember our example of the Shell Bill for clean air.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Congress passed a vague 10-page statute, took their victory lap, and then an alphabet soup agency wrote 10,000 pages of binding, highly technical regulations.
Detailing exactly what kind of combustion engine you are legally allowed to put in a car, or what kind of energy efficiency standards your home appliances must meet.
Yes.
I want to make sure the listener really internalizes the constitutional consequence of this shift because it is staggering.
It is a massive transfer of power.
The source material points out a fundamental difference in accountability here.
Right.
If a bad law is passed by Congress, you, the citizen, have a direct constitutional remedy.
Right. You organize, you campaign, and you vote those specific people out of office.
The chain of accountability is visible and direct. But when an agency passes a bad rule, a rule that might dictate how you run your business or what you can build on your property, you have almost no direct remedy.
None. You cannot vote out a career bureaucrat.
You cannot vote out a deputy undersecretary. You are being governed by people you did not elect, whose names you do not know, and whom you cannot remove.
Accountability vanishes into the bureaucratic ether. The individual citizen is rendered powerless against the machinery of the state.
It's quite a shift.
Now, the source material introduces a highly critical observation at this juncture, and we need to navigate this carefully to impart exactly what Thornberry is diagnosing.
Right, and just to remind everyone listening, we are looking at this strictly as a sociological and structural analysis provided by the text.
Exactly.
We aren't endorsing a partisan worldview here. We are analyzing how different political ecosystems are currently organized to wield power in this workaround environment.
Right. We are not making moral verdicts. The text argues that this structural dynamic, the growth of the administrative state and the synchronization of power, does not manifest symmetrically across the left-right political spectrum.
Thornberry outlines what is described as a pincer movement, executed by the establishment democratic apparatus.
Importantly, this isn't framed as a shadowy, smoke-filled room conspiracy.
No, it's described as an organic sociological coherence among a specific class of people.
A shared worldview that aligns naturally, yes. The text identifies a high degree of integration across three primary domains: academia, legacy media, and the administrative bureaucracy.
So how does that integration work?
Well, academics in elite institutions generate the theoretical frameworks for how society should be managed.
Okay.
Then, the legacy media ecosystem establishes those frameworks as the baseline of intellectual respectability and acceptable discourse.
And
then, the administrative state operationalizes those very same frameworks into binding policy. Thornberry attributes this seamless integration to a shared sociological commitment to managerialism.
Managerialism, let's define that. It's basically the belief that highly credentialed experts are the only ones equipped to manage complex societal problems, right?
That is the core philosophy.
And therefore, they should be structurally insulated from the messy, volatile, uneducated passions of the general public.
Trust the experts, remove the friction of public debate. The text then contrasts this highly integrated machine with the Republican-aligned ecosystem, which it describes as structurally fragmented.
Well, wait, couldn't someone argue that the right-wing ecosystem is just as integrated, with its own massive media networks and think tanks?
It's a fair question. Why does Thornberry classify one as a managerial machine and the other as fragmented?
Right.
It's a question of institutional permanence versus episodic volume.
Okay, what does that mean?
The conservative ecosystem certainly has loud media platforms, but according to the text, it is institutionally isolated from the bureaucratic levers of power and inherently suspicious of the administrative state itself.
Because it lacks that horizontal integration across elite academia and the permanent bureaucracy.
Exactly. Because it lacks that, conservative political energy frequently manifests as episodic electoral backlash.
Ah, I see.
It is incredibly loud at the ballot box. It can win elections, but it struggles to sustain institutional friction or implement lasting policy against a cohesive managerial apparatus between those elections.
So, to summarize the text's observation, one side has built a highly synchronized, permanent institutional machine based on expert management, while the other side relies on decentralized, often volatile populist pushback that surges and recedes.
It's an incredibly stark way to view how the board is currently set.
It really is. It's a structural observation of systemic asymmetry.
And it brings us directly to the accelerant that makes all of this underlying friction so incredibly volatile.
The digital accelerants.
Yes. While the administrative state operates quietly in the shadows, writing rules in windowless office buildings, the political theater operates in the blinding hyperspeed light of the digital era.
Let's go back to Madison for a second. The framers designed a constitution for a world where information traveled at the literal speed of a horse or a sailing ship.
Slow governance. It was a physical reality.
Right. Something happened in Boston. It took weeks for the news to reach Georgia.
This built-in delay meant that by the time politicians gathered to debate an issue, the initial shock had worn off.
Periodic debate, local discourse, deliberative pacing.
The system relied on time for passions to cool.
Here is where it gets really interesting to me. You take a constitutional system designed specifically to be intentionally slow, and you drop it directly into a modern, algorithmic information environment designed for instant, nationalized conflict.
It is a catastrophic mismatch of operating systems.
It completely abolishes deliberative time. The 24/7 social media feeds and hyper-partisan news cycles create a state of permanent campaigning.
And we have to understand the algorithms that drive these platforms. They are not optimized for truth, they are not optimized for civic education, and they are certainly not optimized for nuance.
What are they optimized for?
They are optimized for one thing: engagement.
And what drives human engagement better than anything else? Outrage, anxiety, and tribal identity.
Algorithmic amplification of conflict. The platforms actively, mechanically reward emotionally charged, identity-reinforcing content.
Right. If a politician spends 3 weeks drafting a nuanced, carefully researched white paper about marginal tax rates and posts it online, it vanishes into the void.
Nobody sees it.
But if that same politician posts a furious all-caps message calling their political opponent an existential threat to the nation, it goes viral instantly. It raises millions of dollars.
The algorithm actively destroys the space for compromise that the founders relied upon. Because compromise is boring, and boring doesn't sell ads.
Which leads to a phenomenon that Thornberry outlines called audience capture and reputation volatility. I love this concept because it explains so much bizarre political behavior today.
How do you interpret audience capture from the text?
Well, I see it like a comedian who performs at a club every night. At first, the comedian has a broad, diverse act. Okay.
But over time, they notice that the only people really cheering, the only people buying drinks and merch, are this small group of rabid, extreme fans sitting right in the front row.
So what does the comedian do?
Subconsciously at first, the comedian starts tailoring every single joke just for them. They get edgier, more extreme.
Cater into the base.
Exactly. Eventually, the comedian completely alienates the rest of the room. The moderate fans stop coming. But here's the trap. The comedian can't change the act back.
Why not?
Because those front row fans now control their entire livelihood. If the comedian tries to broaden their appeal, those extreme fans will turn on them, call them a sellout, and ruin their career.
So the comedian is completely captured by their most extreme audience.
Yes, that is exactly what happens to modern elected officials. They become entirely beholden to their most engaged extreme followers online and in the donor base.
Because of the digital accelerant, a leader's reputation built over decades can be destroyed in hours for a single act of compromise. The political cost of nuance, of simply saying, let me take some time to study this complex issue before I make a statement, is prohibitively high.
Hesitation is framed by the base as weakness. Total, instant alignment with the outrage of the day is demanded.
And it's not just the algorithms driving this narrative, is it? The text also points to human actors in the media ecosystem.
The narrative intermediaries.
Yes. The source material specifically names prominent media figures like Ezra Klein, Jake Tapper, Margaret Brennan, and Ronald Brownstein.
Thornberry characterizes these individuals and their peers as gatekeepers of respectability.
Because in this incredibly fast, fragmented information environment, everyday citizens simply do not have the time to process raw, complex reality on their own.
So these intermediaries pre-digest the news.
They set the perimeters of what is considered an acceptable debate.
Precisely. And the critique presented in the text is that when institutional failures occur, say a massive spike in inflation, chaotic border issues, or blatant agency overreach, these intermediaries reliably frame the systemic failure in a very specific way.
They rarely frame it as a fundamental failure of the managerial state itself.
No. Instead, they frame it as the public's failure to adequately understand the state's brilliant complexity.
Or they blame uncooperative political actors who are obstructing the experts.
By doing so, they provide the intellectual cover necessary for the administrative state to continue bypassing Congress.
They frame deliberative delay not as a constitutional safety feature, but as a dangerous threat to democracy itself.
Which brings us to the synthesis of all of these elements. We have to zoom out and look at the whole board here.
Right.
If you combine invisible administrative lawmaking by unelected bureaucrats, party machines pre-curating the candidates, and a fragmented algorithmic median environment that destroys deliberation and captures politicians.
What kind of government do you actually have?
Exactly.
It's certainly not the Republic Madison envisioned.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you arrive at the central defining thesis of Thornberry's work: managed democracy.
Managed democracy. Let's define this very carefully, because the text makes a crucial distinction. This is not classic 20th century authoritarianism.
No, and that is a vital point. There are no secret police dragging dissidents away in the night. There are no canceled elections or military juntas.
The outward forms of democratic life persist beautifully.
You still go to the polling place. Fiery speeches are still given on the floor of the Senate. The flag still waves.
But the actual substance of self-governance has been hollowed out.
Managed democracy is a system that diligently maintains the illusion of public participation while quietly, structurally, constraining the actual substance of self-governance.
It manages the outcomes so that the managerial class is never truly threatened by the voting public.
The text outlines 3 defining characteristics of this state.
Let's break those 3 down. What's the first?
First is pre-filtered agency. As we discussed with the invisible architecture, you are allowed to vote, but the field of acceptable choices was determined long before you arrived by financial and party gatekeepers.
True disruptors, anyone who might actually challenge the structural status quo, are neutralized in the crib.
They are starved of funds or destroyed in the press before they can gain traction.
Wow. And the second is the illusion of accountability.
When a major policy fails in a managed democracy, accountability is a ghost. You might see a politician give a defensive press conference, but you cannot vote out the career bureaucrat who actually wrote the disastrous rule.
Accountability diffuses into the ether of the administrative state. The system protects itself from consequence.
And the third characteristic, structural marginalization.
Dissent in a managed democracy isn't made formally illegal by the government that would violate the First Amendment.
Instead, dissent is structurally rendered inaudible. It is marginalized via algorithmic deplatforming, financial debanking, and exclusion by a unified institutional consensus across tech, legacy media, and corporate finance.
You are allowed to complain, but the system ensures nobody can hear you.
This represents a profound, fundamental shift in how Americans view legitimacy itself. The text points this out, and it feels so incredibly relevant.
It really does, because it used to be that we trusted the process.
Right.
Even if my candidate lost an election or a law passed that I strongly disagreed with, I accepted the outcome because I believed the process itself was fair and constitutional.
That is process-based legitimacy.
But managed democracy shifts the entire culture toward outcome-based legitimacy.
That is the most dangerous cultural shift of all. In an outcome-based system, you only trust the rules if they produce your preferred result.
When the process produces the pre-approved managerial result, it is celebrated as a triumph of democracy.
But when the process produces an unexpected populist result when the public votes the wrong way, the process itself is instantly attacked as illegitimate, hacked, or fundamentally flawed.
A republic that loses faith in its underlying processes will eventually lose the processes themselves. I have to say, sitting here reading through Thornberry's analysis, it sounds incredibly bleak. It feels like we are passengers on a runaway train and the brakes are locked.
It can feel that way, yes.
But the source material insists throughout the text that because these are structural problems, they must have structural solutions. We aren't just doomed to watch the guardrails snap until the bridge collapses.
That is the glimmer of hope in the diagnosis. The text is extremely clear that moral appeals to politicians to just be better or reach across the aisle are useless.
You cannot ask a politician to act against their own survival instincts.
We need what Thornberry calls constraint-aware reforms. These are precise, structural interventions designed to forcibly rewire the incentive structures of the system.
So what do those actual on-the-ground reforms look like?
The first major proposal is a refragmentation of power channels. We have to purposefully break the vertically integrated national party machines.
How do you do that without violating the First Amendment?
You localize candidate selection. You strip power from national PACs and return it to municipal and state-level conventions.
You distribute campaign finance structurally so that a local candidate is not entirely biologically dependent on a massive centralized donor network based in Washington or New York.
You cut the financial strings.
That addresses the pre-constitutional filters. What about Congress itself? How do you fix Tier 2 of the fragility hierarchy?
The restoration of Article I primacy. Congress must be forced, legally, to do its job again. The text suggests something called statutory specificity mandates.
Explain how that mechanism works.
It essentially means sunsetting vague delegations of power. If an executive agency wants to enact a sweeping, economically massive rule like transforming the energy grid, the law empowering them to do so must automatically expire after a set period, say 2 years, unless Congress explicitly votes to reauthorize it.
You make it illegal for Congress to hide. You force lawmakers to put their names on the record for the real controversial issues affecting citizens' lives.
Force them to take the hard votes.
I love that. And what about the digital accelerant? The media environment?
Thornberry calls for media and epistemic reform. This includes hard algorithmic transparency requirements. The public and independent researchers must be able to see exactly how social media platforms are artificially amplifying outrage and suppressing deliberation.
Furthermore, it requires a massive, sustained civic investment in independent, localized journalism.
We have to rebuild shared factual realities at the community level, entirely outside of the national, hyper-partisan narrative frameworks.
And finally, fixing the core issue, the politician's survival instinct, incentive realignment.
This is perhaps the most practical near-term solution. Mechanisms like ranked choice voting and open, nonpartisan primaries.
Think back to our captured comedian.
Right.
If a politician knows they can survive a primary challenge from their extreme front row flank because the primary is open to all voters, and they can build a broad coalition in the general election via ranked choice voting, their entire calculus changes.
They are suddenly incentivized to compromise, to deliberate, and to appeal to the middle again. You structurally reduce the power of the hyperpartisan base and reward constitutional fidelity.
Okay, here is where I have to step in and push back. I see the logic in every single one of these structural reforms. Ranked choice voting, sunsetting agency rules, breaking up the money networks, it makes perfect engineering sense. But let's be real. How on earth do we expect the very politicians, the very national party bosses, and the very narrative intermediaries who currently benefit massively from this managed democracy to implement the reforms that will dismantle their own power?
It's a massive hurdle.
Why would a machine ever vote to unplug itself?
It is the ultimate political catch-22. And to its credit, the text does not sugarcoat this reality. Thornberry asserts that structural reform on this massive scale requires one highly specific psychological precondition: a shared alarm.
Shared alarm, meaning things have to get bad enough that everyone realizes we're in trouble.
Alarm is the absolute precondition of correction. Thornberry uses a brilliant metaphor of a bridge to explain where we are right now.
Okay, let's hear the bridge metaphor.
The American system is not yet broken. Traffic is still flowing over it. But it is operating in a supercritical state. It is surviving purely on stress tolerance, rather than the structural integrity it was originally engineered with.
It looks like a completely functioning bridge from a distance.
Exactly. A bridge relying on its built-in structural integrity will comfortably last a century. A bridge that has lost its integrity and is surviving purely on its remaining stress tolerance might last a decade, a year, or it might collapse the very next time slightly heavier than normal load passes over it.
The greatest danger we face is complacency mistaking continued daily function for long-term stability.
The leaders will not reform the system willingly. Reform will only happen when a critical mass of citizens and leaders across the political spectrum look closely at the stress tolerance of the bridge, realize it is vibrating dangerously, and decide that the sheer survival of the republic is more important than the short-term partisan advantage of their specific faction.
The fear of the catastrophic fall has to eventually outweigh the love of the power.
Precisely. That is the only force strong enough to rewrite the incentives.
Well, we have covered massive ground today. We started with Madison's brilliant physics problem, a machine intentionally built on friction to protect our liberty from our own passions.
And we watched how modern, horizontally and vertically synchronized political parties hack that machine, bypassing the friction and putting unbearable sustained weight on our constitutional guardrails.
We walked through the fragility hierarchy, seeing those guardrails snap one by one from the loss of basic behavioral norms to Congress cowardly outsourcing its job to the shadowy administrative state.
We looked closely at how the digital era, with its algorithmic outrage and audience capture, acts as a terrifying accelerant to the decay.
And finally, we arrived at the stark reality of managed democracy, a system that pre-filters our choices, diffuses accountability into the ether, and manages outcomes before we ever cast a ballot, operating entirely on borrowing time and stress tolerance rather than structural integrity.
It's a profound structural shift, away from the foundational design.
Yeah.
And understanding the hidden mechanics of that shift, seeing the invisible architecture for what it is the only way to even begin talking about a cure.
Exactly. Which brings us back to where we started. We opened with the desire for a clean, visible diagnosis. Well, Jamie Thornberry provided the X-ray, and it clearly shows a system under supercritical historical stress.
It does.
The source text leaves us with that famous quote from Benjamin Franklin given as he walked out of the Constitutional Convention. "A republic, if you can keep it." But looking at everything we've unpacked today, it leaves me with one final thought. If managed democracy inherently relies on the illusion of participation to keep the general public compliant, what happens when the majority of the public finally realizes they are being managed?
When they see the strings.
Exactly. Does the loss of that illusion force the system to repair itself out of a sudden shared alarm? Or does the sudden realization by the public trigger the exact crisis of legitimacy, the exact catastrophic collapse of the bridge that the managerial system was trying so desperately to prevent in the first place?
That is the civilizational question for the next decade.
Something heavy to mull over as you watch the news or scroll through your algorithms this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.